Okay, so today is day 42 of my Britain-by-Kayak trip, and I'm with Tim, who it's been great. Tim's put me up in his apartment here in Woolwickham, which is great. But we wanted to have a chat about yesterday because day 41 didn't turn out quite as we'd planned it to. And I think it's quite an interesting story, and maybe there's some lessons to pull out of it. So thought it'd be good to record our reflections on yesterday. So Tim, do you want to start with how the day started at Tintagel?
Yeah, so we did quite a lot of planning, and you did a lot of planning with Adam and research in terms of the weather. The weather's been closed out, rainy, squally. Quite a lot of surf the last few days and the days to come, but they looked like there was a bit of a break in the weather, and so you made the decision that Tintagel was where you put in a few days ago.
Yep.
And you were going to go,
having left the water early because the conditions were so rough.
That's right.
Yeah.
And on this day you were going to go to Tintagel to Bude.
Yes, which was the rest of the day that I didn't complete previously, before the high winds forced 2 days off, actually. And so it was only, a 26 kilometre hop from Tintagel to Bude. Didn't seem too onerous. There was a weather window. The wind was forecast to be substantially less than it had been the previous 2 days, and certainly doable in terms of paddling, and the sea state looked to be okay as well. So and I think I was quite keen to get back on the water and make some progress, having had 2 days off. And I wonder whether that's a factor in terms of what happened, and not considering all of the factors that perhaps I should have done. So we got to Tintagel about 10:30,
something like that.
and it was high water, which meant that the swells were coming into Tintagel Cove. It was quite feisty, wasn't it? They were sort of bashing against the rocks at the top of the beach. There was no beach actually, so we had time. It was high water then, and we knew that within an hour or so there would be a beach. So we took the opportunity to walk out onto the headland, assess the sea conditions, which was still quite blowy on the headland, wasn't it? It was still quite windy.
Yep, still quite windy,
yeah.
And quite lumpy and choppy, and the bay itself that you were paddling out of, there were some sets coming through that were fairly feisty, I would have said.
They were feisty, but I think they were timed so there were breaks in it, and if I got the exit timing right, it would be fine. There was also a big rock out in the middle which gave a bit of a shadow, so the plan was to launch, avoid the sets, get in the shadow of that, assess, and then make the break out of the haven out to sea into what was quite lumpy off those two headlands there. So we got the boat and the gear down after the beach emerged. You did a little interview with me, which we might cut into this, and then I got into the boat and it went okay. I lost the paddle actually on my first attempt, didn't I? So I had to go and retrieve my paddle because it got washed away by one of the sets. But I think I timed it okay, got out without any problems, got into the shadow of the rock, and then made a bid out into the open sea.
And I would say that it was impressive the way you went out. You just poked your nose around the rock, and then just watch you paddling out into that sea was also very impressive. Just sort of disappearing offshore. Yeah,
and I headed out to two fishermen's buoys because I was keen to get a grasp of what the tide was doing. We had some contradictory information from the apps. In theory, it was going to be going against me. One app suggested it would be going, and I think ChatGPT suggested it would be going with me. But it was indeed going against me. But once I got out there, I found a lumpy sea, a kinetic sea, quite lively because of the rebounding energy from the cliffs. But totally fine. It was fine. It wasn't the sort of sea that you could get a decent rhythm, because you were always sort of the boat was always moving around, but it was okay. And my boat speed, despite the tide being against me, was still around about 7-8 kilometers an hour. And the wind and the swells were at a level that was helpful rather than a hindrance. So sometimes when the wind gets too strong, you end up weathercocking and the boat just wants to turn into the wind all the while, and that wasn't happening. So that was good. So I think that counterbalanced the adverse tide. And I made my way along the cliffs. It got a bit murky and a bit wet, didn't it? It started to rain.
Yeah.
I remember going past Boscastle at 5 kilometers, and I was about, I don't know, 1.5, maybe 2 kilometers off the cliffs, and I couldn't see Boscastle at all. It just merged into the cliffs. But then Crackerton Haven is a big feature, and the headlands there. I saw that. That's about 12k into the paddle, an hour and a half in. And then I thought, well, it'll be interesting to see if the sea state changes from the lumpy kinetic one when I get off Widmouth Bay, because Widmouth Bay is a beach and you'd expect less reflective energy. And indeed it did. It went really, really flat, calm, and it was great. The sun came out for a while and it was all good. And I was on for completing the journey in less than 3 hours, I think.
Yeah, you were making fast time. I was keeping an eye on the GPS. And you said that you saw Bude Beach in the distance.
I did. Once I got my bearings on Bude, I could see the buildings of Bude. And what stood out, and this was the first warning sign, was the cloud of spray that hung over the beach break. And that's always a telltale sign. And I know it's a telltale sign that the beach break is big. And it was the only part of the coastline that had this. Yes, there were waves bashing against the base of the cliffs, but there wasn't that haze hanging over the beach break along Widmouth, for example, that suggested there was something going on that was a bit more active than I was anticipating at Bude. But I was cutting a direct course across Widmouth Bay. I wasn't hugging the coast, so I didn't really know what the situation was in Widmouth. And in hindsight, maybe at that point, I should have thought, there's an indicator of a big beach break where I want to land. That's not a good sign. Maybe I should check out Widmouth as an alternative as I'm going past, just to see.
Because Widmouth didn't have that haze of spray hanging.
No, I don't recall it having that haze at all. And it has marginally a slightly different aspect and a slightly different shaped beach. The tide was on the way in, it was flooding, and every beach is different. So I could have found that the beach break at Widmouth would have been shorter, perhaps more predictable, and more viable than Bude turned out to be. We're now getting to the crunch of it, because when I arrived at Bude at just under 3 hours into the journey, I very quickly realised that the sets coming in that had been quite, actually not as big as the ones I'd experienced in previous days, were building outside Bude and were coming through probably a couple of metres high, and every now and again these very big sets were coming through and were breaking very early, quite a long way out. So there was a double break scenario going on, which extended the sort of risk zone, if you like. And my gut feeling was, I don't like this. I'm still a long way out and I'm on the edge of some really big sets, and if I get caught in the wrong place, that could have some consequences. And I'd had some experience of this in Spain in February in my training block, where I got caught a couple of times. And my philosophy for this trip was I must lower the thresholds of what's acceptable and what's not, because the purpose is always to be able to turn up tomorrow. You know, it's not sort of a hero joyride today for the sake of it. It's sort of play it safe. So I found myself in a bit of a precarious position, and I thought maybe a second opinion would be good. And I phoned you.
Yeah,
Remember what I said?
You phoned me, and I was just at that point, because you'd made such good time. I was actually just walking over the dunes, onto the beach and saw the beach, and it was breaking pretty big. The lifeguards were there, and you said, I don't like it. I mean, you were concerned about it, clearly, and you asked me for an opinion, and I said, well, the lifeguards are here. I'll have a chat with them, see what their opinion is. So
and I think it's worth saying before you approach that in my mind was an option, and the option, putting aside Widmouth, because I didn't really think seriously about going back there, and perhaps I should have done. My option was to go to Hartland Point, and Hartland Point is a very exposed headland, another 2.5-3 hours paddle north. But to me, it was going the right way. It was progress on my trip. And once you roundhead Hartland Point, there are a couple of small beaches to the east, which face north, and they would be, in theory, protected from this swell. And then a bit further along the coast, you've got Clovelly, which actually faces almost northeast and has a harbour. So although I'd be facing a 3, maybe 4 hour paddle, I still had some food and I still had some water, so I thought that's an option. So that's the context in which I was asking your opinion, and then you spoke to the lifeguards.
That's it. You said, should I push on to Heartland? That's in the back of my mind. Can I get in here? As I walked up to the beach and talked to them, it seemed as though that the big sets were coming in quite close to the harbour wall, but they're not the harbour wall, but the breakwater wall. But there seemed to be a slightly smaller area to the right. Anyway, I talked to the lifeguards, and it turned out that Minnie Fry, who was on duty, is one of the most knowledgeable and long-serving lifeguards that exist.
Over 40 years experience there,
And he very quickly, we went up to the rocks and we could see you out the back there, and they could see you from the back of the lifeguard boat. But he very quickly decided that coming in on your own was not really an option. He didn't feel that just giving you the advice to come in was an option. So he then came back and decided to get some advice from the Coast Guard. So he came back, rang up the Coast Guard to inform them, and the Coast Guard then went off the radio, and then they actually consulted their managers about what they felt was the most appropriate course of action to take. So suddenly,
and all this was taking quite a long time, wasn't it? And it's worth saying that during that time, a squally front moved through, the temperature dropped, and the wind speed increased noticeably, probably to a high 4 low 5, which was then serving to drive the swells even harder onto the beach, and I started to get cold. So you started to get cold, and the tide was coming in, so the swell was actually getting bigger. And of course we were heading towards evening, so it was about 5:30 this time, maybe 6 o'clock, something around then. And what was interesting about the Coast Guard process was that they did go through a routine that they had worked out. Minnie Fry called up the Coast Guard then consulted their managers, and then they decided a course of action. They came back to the lifeguards, and the lifeguards in the end decided that they would come out to you on the jet ski, and that they would coach you in on the most appropriate lull in the sets. And Minnie Fry, having lifeguarded this beach for 45 years, I thought that you hit the right day, because he's a man who knows this beach back to front. He felt that he needed some backup, so they and bells should start ringing here.
So they called out the lifeboat, which was a ridgeable lifeboat that was just up the beach, and they took another 20-25 minutes. So you've been out paddling up and down now about 45 minutes at least. By the time they then decide to come out to you on the jet ski, so the lifeboat is called, the lifeboat gets sort of in the shallows, they're reticent about going out through the surf. And I talked to Charlie, who was this sort of young lifeguard, and he said to me, I really wouldn't want to go out there today on the jet ski, because he was the guy hanging on the kind of raft at the
On
back.
the platform, yeah.
He said, but I'm with Minnie Fry and it's going to be absolutely fine. But otherwise, I wouldn't be going out there. So anyway, yeah, eventually they came out to you.
He came, and we'd had several conversations on the phone, which was quite tricky, because every time you phoned me, I had to get my phone out of the pocket, one-handed, in quite a sort of dynamic environment. Luckily, the phone always responded, and I could speak to you, which was good. But there was this sense of, blimey, I just wanted some advice on whether I land and whether I just carry on to Heartland. And now suddenly the thing was being taken out of my control, our control, and things were starting to escalate. And so when I found out that the lifeguards had called on the lifeboat to give them some backup, I was thinking, oh yeah, this is starting to become a thing now, you know. Anyway, eventually Minnie and Charlie came out through the break, and I watched carefully to see where they came out, thinking that was probably the line they'd want to go back in on. But when he got to me, it was great actually. They were fantastic, both of them, and we had a bit of a chat. And he said, let's go out further outside the break, because we're still vulnerable here. So we went a little bit further. He said, right, now I want us to go 300 meters south, because I think that's going to be the position of best approach. That surprised me a bit, because my perception, similar to yours, was that a line closer to Crooklets Beach to the north looked more often more attainable. But anyway, you go with what he says, and so we went up 300 meters, and he said before we left for that southerly passage, he said that when we get there, we'll have a look, we'll have a think again, we'll assess the options, and then we'll make a call. So great, I set off paddling, he's alongside, we're well outside the break line, everything's fine. And I'm thinking, well, okay, I've got a jet ski with two very experienced guys with me here, but I don't think it's really going to change the outcome. I'm still going to get caught in one of the breaks, and I don't know what the outcome of that's going to be. He was very reassuring, and he said, look, if you come out of your boat, we're just going to be with you within seconds, and we're going to pick you up. Happy days. And I have no doubt that's what was going to happen. And I felt on balance and probabilities, looking at the sets coming through, I wasn't going to get through quick enough. I didn't have the boat speed to get through the danger zone fast enough into the break that I could cope with. So there was a good chance I'd probably be pulled out of my boat at some point. So anyway, we get to the 300 meter mark and we stop, and I'm more up again alongside the jet ski, and Minnie just turns to me and he said, I don't like this. You're getting out of your boat and you're getting on the jet ski. And he made the decision. I thought, okay, well, you know, if he's come out through the surf and he's had to think about it and he doesn't like what he sees, then that's good enough for me. I think that confirms actually my assessment that it wasn't viable. He was then saying, I don't think this is viable, but actually what is viable is you get on the ski, I take you back through the surf, I leave Charlie out here floating in the water with your sea kayak, and then he'll drop me off, he'll return to Charlie in the sea kayak, and they'll shepherd, tow, nudge, whatever they do, the boat in to the best of their abilities to recover it to the beach. So that was it. The decision was made, and I hopped out onto the platform. Charlie slid into the water next to Goose Juice. We offloaded all the valuables, you know, the GoPro and the GPS and things like that, off the deck. I secured my paddle under the paddle park, and I had it tethered anyway. I'd already geared up for rough water. I was wearing my helmet and things like that, and the paddle tether, the paddle leash was in play. So the paddle was secured to the front deck. I got on the back of the jet ski, and I had an El Nazir ride through, which was just, wow, was it exhilarating. And Minnie was like flying around trying to avoid all the faces of these waves and things like that, and it was wonderful. I wish I'd recorded it. But he got me safely back to the beach, and I joined you there, and we just turned and watched him fly back out through the surf again and rejoin Charlie. And then there was a bit of a waiting game, wasn't there? You know, in terms of
the boat.
In terms of when we saw them next.
Yeah, indeed. And then eventually we saw the boat kind of making its way
through
through the surf.
And what we didn't know was that they were sort of semi-towing it, pulling it alongside the jet ski. And then what Minnie told me afterwards, a very large wave came through. He said it was sort of 8 to 10 foot. And his assessment's probably better than mine. I probably exaggerate wave size, and he said they just had to abandon the boat and look after themselves. But he said the wave did its job and actually pushed the boat, carried the boat into the beach, where the team on the beach then recovered it. And they were fantastic. The whole RNLI team were very slick, very professional, very calm.
They were, and completely, as you mentioned yesterday, non-judgmental.
Non-judgmental, almost quite, happy to be involved and happy to help, and that was lovely, really, and very friendly. So the boat came up. I heard on the radio, I think, that there wasn't any paddles attached, but then somebody said that they'd found them. So I thought, blimey, we're doing well here. And then Goose Juice was finally brought back to us. And there'd been some damage to the rudder. So the rudder head that I replaced in Southampton had been smashed off, and the paddles were missing. They were later recovered, but one blade had been snapped off. I think because it was secured in the paddle park at one end, at the front of the bow of the boat, and the other end probably was pulled up, and it had nowhere to go, so it just broke the blade. That must have been quite a force. There was various bits missing. My paddle float, my sponge, the seat pad. I thought they had all gone to the wind, but they all washed up on the beach, and the RNLI guys recovered the whole lot. So nothing actually got lost except the broken bit of the blade. So,
which is amazing.
Yeah.
So how are you feeling inside? You've had 24 hours now, just about, to reflect on it.
Yeah, lots of things going around my head, really. Because nobody wants to get, caught, have an incident like that where the RNLI are needed. And it's not that it was prompted by an emergency. It was prompted by a question. But then they went, actually this is quite serious. And I think once I was in that network and under their sphere of influence, in what was, a precarious position, my answer was keep paddling up to somewhere else where it would be safer, even though it was another 3 hours paddling. But you can see from their perspective, they don't want to let someone go whilst they've still got control of them and they can help them. So I totally get why we ended up going down the road.
And in fact, they said that. They said, when we talked, I had a conversation with them about going up the coast to Ireland, and their response was, the Coast Guard wants to see you ashore. If you go on from here, there's no lifeguard between now and Heartland, and it's suddenly out of their control.
Clovelly would be the next one.
Yeah. So from their point of view, as you say, once they're involved, they want to get you ashore.
They want to get ashore, yeah. And and I think what was interesting was that they started off with the approach, well, the jet ski will go out there and give me some advice, shepherd me in, show me what the line is, to once they'd gone out through the surf break themselves, they went, no, this Minnie's decision was, no, this isn't viable. So really pleased to have that expert help. Quite pleased that my hunch actually was validated, that I thought it was too big. So the question then remains, how did I end up there? What part of the planning process failed to allow for that? And I think on our reflections, what happened is we spent too much time on the swell at sea and the wind at sea forecast, which was manageable, and not on the landing zone and the surf report, which we didn't check in detail. Because in hindsight, if we'd have looked at yesterday's surf report, which I think said 7 to 9 foot, that should have gone, that should have said, no, I'm not landing in 7 to 9 foot. Probably anything more than about 4 foot is dodgy in an expedition sea kayak. For me, in any case. So maybe at that point, my plan would have been, well, I'm just going to go straight to Heartland Point anyway, and cut the corner straight there and take that north-facing beach, maybe I'd have made that decision. Maybe I'd have thought about Widmouth. Maybe I'd have thought, I'm going to have another day off. But the fact is, I didn't pay attention to the landing. And I think I was a bit naive with my memory of Bude, having surfed there. I can remember the beach break, the breakwater, and I can remember surfing inside the breakwater. So to my mind, that I would arrive and I would just tuck round that breakwater into some calmer water, and there was a deep water channel. Of course it wasn't, because it was low tide, and there isn't a deep water option at low tide. The sea was probably the foreshore was probably level with the end of the breakwater, and it was just all sand. Now maybe it would have been different at high water, but that's not when I arrived. It's still the same problem. I didn't assess properly the landing zone and the impact of the swell at Bude, and that's a lesson that I've got to learn. Yeah, to include a more thorough assessment of the landing zone, particularly when it's a beach. Yeah. So there's a bit of me thinks, oh, hey, you should have just sucked it up and just paddled in, and it would have been fine.
And it might.
It might have been.
It would have been rolling the dice. Is what it would have done.
Absolutely, and that's not expedition. That's not good expedition decision making.
No.
But nevertheless, the RNLI did have to get involved, and I regret that. But that was it worked out for the best, and I got a hell of a ride out of it.
and Minnie Fry, the lifeguard, afterwards said, I mean, he was very, very supportive. He talked about that he's done his own expeditions around Devon and Cornwall. He's offered you replacement paddles.
He has to lend me paddles.
He's
a surf skier.
In fact, your boat is now in the shed where he stores his surf ski.
And that was lovely. There was no judgment. There was no, what on earth were you thinking? I think quite the opposite, actually. I think they're quite supportive of what I was trying to do, and understanding that I found myself in that predicament, and at least my gut feeling was vindicated, and they were able to help. So they're a superb outfit, very professional, and thank you to Minnie, Charlie, and the rest of the RNLI team at Bude for what they did. It was regrettable but nice thing to be part of. Yeah. Well, thank you for all your support, and sorry for putting you in that position where I said, is it viable or not? That's a difficult question to ask.
Well, it's a difficult question to answer, and the lesson, which we sort of all knew anyway, is that from the beach things look a lot easier than when you're out the back.
Yeah,
even Minnie thought it was viable for you to paddle in.
Yeah.
Until he got out the back
there, and they were scary. I was sitting there looking up some big lumps, and nearly got caught a long way out when they were breaking a long way out, and they were at least 2 meters. They may have been more. And I thought, if it goes wrong, it can go very badly wrong. So anyway, we're all here. Got a few repairs to do. It's all good.
Good.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, cheers.